Quite a number of students have asked if it's possible to go over what a really well-crafted Peel paragraph response would look like to an inspector calls past question response. And essentially what you guys have asked is to dissect what a perfect paragraph looks like when writing about one of the inspector calls characters. So what I decided to do is to answer what came up in the 2014 paper relating to Sheila's character, and more specifically how her character changes. And what I want to do is to really dissect within this lesson how to craft literally the perfect paragraph when it comes to writing about an inspector calls and writing about a character. And what I want to show you is how you can put together all of those different components into a fairly straightforward Peel paragraph to aim for your grade 8 and grade 9 answers. Okay, so the question, as I mentioned, is taken from the 2014 exam, and the question is, how and why does Sheila change in an inspector calls? Now, if I were to look at this question, I would first begin by focusing in on the keywords. What are the most important aspects of this question? And I would say the most important aspect of this question is Sheila changing. Of course, you can say how she changes and why, but most central to this question is the fact that Sheila transforms. And I would argue, from looking at the play as a whole, Sheila probably is the character that has the most dramatic transformation, followed by Eric. But I would argue that Sheila is the one that changes the most. Now, as I mentioned, when crafting a response to this question in this particular play, I always stand by the Peel paragraph structure. I think it is really strong, really powerful, and equally within a Peel paragraph, so point, evidence, explanation, link, you can still really coherently put everything that you need, including techniques, context, and discussions relevant to the question, and still score those grade 8s and grade 9s. Okay, let me show you how to do so. So as I mentioned, I would suggest going for the Peel point and the Peel paragraph structure. So as you can see here in blue, this is the opening point that you can relate to how and why Sheila changes. Then in red, this is the evidence. You want to always make sure you embed the evidence, and embedding simply means if you were to take out the quotation, the speech marks, the evidence still flows as part of the sentence. This is in red. Then as you can see here, the bulk of my writing is my explanation. This is where I would argue the bulk of your marks within, when your examiner or your teacher is looking at your response, this is where these marks live. Okay, this is where you start unpacking. Okay, here's technique, here's context, here's even theme, and this is why it's relevant to the question. Before, as you can see at the bottom here in purple, I've simply linked it back to the question and closed off my paragraph. So let's begin with the Peel point as to how you can discuss how and why Sheila changes. So we're starting off with this point. Sheila changes as the play progresses because at first she was naive about how challenging life was like for women like Eva Smith. Once she learns how appalling life was for working class women, Sheila transforms her attitude and defends Eva Smith. So that's my opening point. What have I done within my opening point? What I have done is, firstly, I have began by referring back to the question, and I mention how she changes. So she changes when the play progresses, because she shifts from being really naive, kind of like clueless, flighty, she doesn't really know, how the world works, and she goes from being naive to realizing how hard life is for women like Eva Smith, who she had a hand in having fired from Millwards. But equally, what I then do is develop this point just a little bit by explaining, okay, she also changes because she learns how appalling, how terrible life was for working class women. Okay, I would suggest when you're opening your opening point, so this is the first part of your Peel paragraph, I would suggest go for 2 sentences. The first sentence is addressing the question directly. The second is just developing that a little bit and unpacking that. That's exactly what I've done. So that's my point. Okay, that's the first step within my Peel paragraph. Now I'm going to move on into my second step, which is my evidence. She admits, I started it, first bit of evidence, and she's enraged at her family's dismissive attitude as they pretend nothing really happened, ellipsis, nothing to be sorry for. So I've added 2 bits of evidence where I've included I started it. This is how she says, you know, I totally take responsibility. And also at the end, she says nothing really happened, nothing to be sorry for. She's being really critical of her family. Now, as I mentioned, if I were to take out the speech marks here, so in front of I started it and afterwards, as well as nothing really happened, the sentence will still flow quite seamlessly, okay? It will still make sense as part of the overall sentence. This is what I mean by embedding quotation. But also what I've done is I've given some really good quotations and picked out different parts of the play in order to kind of show a range in my evidence, okay? So that's the first E in my peel paragraph. However, the second E is even more important. So let's have a look. This is now your explanation where you go into analysis, and this is also where you go into things like context or theme. So let's have a look at the second E. She dramatically changes as the repetition of the word nothing reveals her disgust that none of her family aside from Eric take responsibility for the treatment of Eva Smith. Contextually, so now here I'm talking about context, okay? Contextually, Sheila was sharply criticizing how harshly upper class people in Edwardian society treated working class women. Her earlier naivety reveals the gulf, the gap between upper class sheltered women like her and vulnerable working class women like Eva. She evidently transforms her attitude as she empathizes with her struggles. So there's quite a lot that I have unpacked within my second E in my peel paragraph. This is my explanation. I have gone into language, or rather structure analysis, because I'm talking about repetition. So I've talked about technique. This is Precy's technique as a playwright. I've also gone into context, so I've made it really clear. Okay, so Sheila's change, what is she contextually trying to allude to? What is Precy contextually trying to allude to? And then I've still made sure to illustrate how she was naive at the beginning versus how she shifts and she takes on responsibility and really feels empathy and pathos for Eva Smith, who represents working class women. So let's have a quick look back at this explanation. Okay, so as I mentioned, I start off, my first explanation sentence is basically mentioning technique, okay? So she dramatically changes as a repetition structure of the word nothing. So I'm now going back to my quotation. Reveals her disgust that none of her family outside from Eric take responsibility for the treatment of Eva Smith. That's my first sentence in my explanation, okay? I talk about technique. However, in my second sentence within my explanation, I now tie it to context. Contextually, Sheila was sharply criticizing how harshly upper class people in Edwardian society treated working class women. So now I'm mentioning context. I'm really making it explicit and making it known to my teacher and my examiner that I have a very strong awareness of context. I know how this is relevant in terms of this juxtaposition between girls like Eva Smith and women like Eva Smith who are working class, as opposed to upper class and upper middle class women like Sheila. There was a massive gap in their experiences. But then I don't stop there. I then go into a little bit of detail to kind of explain it and to juxtapose how Sheila was like also before. I then state her earlier naivety, so this is Sheila, reveals the gulf, the gap between upper class sheltered women like her and vulnerable working class women like Eva. Again, I'm showing that there's this massive divide, but Sheila is now aware of it. She wasn't aware of it before when she was naive, when she was really aloof and she was kind of thinking that, you know, her head was up in the clouds. Now she understands it. Then I round off my explanation by stating she evidently transforms her attitude, relating it back to her being changing, as she empathizes with her struggles, okay? So as I stated, you need to really pack a lot of this information in your explanation. This is where the bulk of your marks are. This is where your analysis goes in, your context, or you can substitute this contextual discussion for a theme discussion. Now, this is my final L. This is the link back to the question, and this is how I round off my peel paragraph. Okay, so this is the purple bit. Thus, Sheila arguably experiences the most dramatic change. She shifts from being aloof and flighty to seeking penance and accepting responsibility. When you're aloof, it means your head is up in the clouds. When you're flighty, you're kind of, you know, like really, you don't think about really serious issues and serious things. You just kind of think about very surface, artificial and superficial things, okay? So I'm saying that Sheila has gone from being very surface, superficial, artificial, and she shifts once she realizes how appalling life is for people like Eva Smith, and now she becomes quite serious, okay? And she also, you know, develops develops empathy and pathos for women like Eva Smith, okay? So going back to this, literally all I've done is just make sure I've linked it back to the question. This is my linking back. And I'm basically saying that she arguably, good terms to use, the most dramatic change, okay? And she shifts from being aloof and flighty, so this is how and why she changes, to seeking penance, seeking forgiveness, and accepting full responsibility for her actions, okay? So that's really it when it comes to how to kind of craft a really, really powerful and solid grade 9 paragraph using the Peel structure, point, evidence, explanation, link, where you really add in techniques, evidence, and so on. And you want to try and aim to do at least 4 of these types of paragraphs in your essay. So that's really it, and thank you so much for listening.